Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the only food keeping your family alive had turned into black, rotting slime. That was the nightmare island faced in 1845 across the countryside. Healthy green potato plants began collapsing almost overnight. Their leaves darkened, their stems withered, and beneath the soil, the potatoes themselves dissolved into a foul-smelling mass. For millions of people, this was not simply a failed harvest. It was the disappearance of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The disease returned the following year. Then it returned again and again. Over the next several years, around 1 million people died from starvation and disease. At least another million fled Ireland, many aboard overcrowded ships where sickness and death followed them across the Atlantic. It became one of the greatest humanitarian disasters of the 19th century, and at the center of it all was a crop that much of Europe had once considered ugly, dangerous, and barely fit for human consumption. A crop that had built civilizations, fed armies, transformed entire populations, and eventually reached beyond Earth itself, the potato. But to understand how this strange underground plant changed the world, we have to travel thousands of years into the past, to one of the harshest farming environments on the planet. The story of the potato begins roughly 8,000 years ago in the Andes Mountains of South America. In what is now Peru and Bolivia, people lived and farmed at elevations where the air was thin, the nights were freezing, and the soil was rocky and unforgiving. This was not an easy place to grow food. Temperatures could change dramatically within a single day. Frost could destroy a crop overnight. Rainfall was unpredictable, and many plants that flourished at lower elevations simply could not survive there. But wild potatoes could. They grew close to the ground, hidden beneath the soil, protected from cold winds and sudden changes in weather. They were also very different from the large, smooth potatoes found in supermarkets today. Many were tiny, some were no larger than a walnut, others were twisted, knotted, brightly colored, or covered in strange bumps, and many of them were bitter or toxic. Wild potatoes naturally produce defensive chemicals known as glycoalkaloids. These compounds help protect the plant from insects and animals, but in high concentrations, they can also make humans seriously ill. Eating the wrong wild potato could cause stomach pain, vomiting, confusion, and, in extreme cases, death. The early people of the Andes therefore faced a remarkable challenge. How do you turn a poisonous plant into a dependable source of food? They solved the problem gradually through generations of observation, experimentation, and selective breeding. Farmers learned to identify plants with less bitterness and fewer harmful compounds. They saved the safest tubers and replanted them. Season after season, generation after generation, they selected potatoes that were larger, milder, and more useful. They did not know the modern language of genetics, but they were practicing genetic selection thousands of years before the science had a name. Andean communities also developed methods to make bitter varieties safer to eat. Some potatoes were soaked or washed, others were frozen, dried, or prepared with specific types of clay that could bind to certain toxic compounds. These techniques were not primitive accidents. They were the result of deep agricultural knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Over time, the people of the Andes transformed a collection of bitter mountain plants into one of the most productive food crops humanity had ever known. The potato could survive in places where maize struggled. It produced large amounts of food from a relatively small area, and because the edible part grew underground, it was protected from wind, hail, and many grazing animals. But growing potatoes was only the beginning. Fresh potatoes contain water, and water makes food heavy, difficult to transport, and vulnerable to decay. The civilizations of the Andes needed a way to preserve their harvest through long winters, failed growing seasons, and military campaigns. Their solution was so effective that versions of it are still used today. By the time the Inca Empire rose to power in the 15th century, Andean farmers were cultivating an astonishing range of potatoes, Thousands of local varieties existed across the region. Some grew best in damp valleys, others survived on freezing mountain slopes. Some matured quickly, others resisted drought, frost, pests, or disease. The Inca did not rely on one single potato. They relied on diversity. That diversity acted like a form of agricultural insurance. If one variety failed, another might survive. But the Inca also mastered preservation. Their most famous potato product was called chuño. To make it, families spread potatoes across the frozen ground of the high Andes. During the night, the potatoes froze solid under the strong mountain sun. They thawed during the day. The process was repeated over several nights. The softened potatoes were then pressed underfoot to remove moisture and loosen their skins. After further drying, they became light, hard, pale, and extremely durable. In modern terms, chuño was a naturally freeze-dried food. It could remain edible for years when stored properly. That made it invaluable. Chuño could feed communities after a poor harvest. It could be carried by soldiers over long distances. It could be stored in government warehouses and redistributed during emergencies. For the Inca state, food storage was not simply a matter of convenience. It was a source of political power. An empire stretching across mountains, deserts, and valleys needed reliable supplies. Roads and armies were important, but neither could function without food. The potato helped make that system possible. It was not merely something the Inca ate. It was part of the infrastructure that held their civilization together. Then, in the 16th century, strangers arrived from across the ocean. They came searching for gold, silver, land, and power. And for years, they barely understood the value of the crop growing beneath their feet. Spanish forces entered the Inca world in the 1530s. They encountered cities, roads, irrigation systems, terraces, warehouses, and agricultural practices, unlike anything they had seen before. But the conquistadors were not primarily interested in agricultural science. They wanted precious metals. Potatoes were occasionally used to feed workers, soldiers, and sailors, and at some point during the second half of the 16th century, the crop reached Europe. But its arrival did not cause excitement. It caused confusion. Europeans were familiar with wheat, barley, rye, and oats. These crops grew above the ground and could be turned into bread, a food with enormous religious and cultural importance. The potato was different. It grew underground, hidden in darkness. It was irregular, muddy, and difficult to classify. It was not a grain. It was not a familiar root. It was not mentioned in European religious traditions. Even more suspiciously, the potato belonged to the nightshade family, the same botanical family as several poisonous plants. To people who knew little about plant classification, that connection seemed alarming. Rumors spread in different parts of Europe. Potatoes were accused of causing disease, immorality, digestive problems, and nearly every other misfortune people could imagine. Some communities associated them with leprosy. Others called them food for animals, prisoners, or the desperately poor. In parts of the Russian Empire, peasants reportedly referred to potatoes as the devil's apples. In some religious communities, people distrusted the crop because it was not mentioned in the Bible. These stories were often inconsistent, exaggerated, or based more on fear than evidence, but they had real consequences. For generations, many Europeans refused to eat potatoes even during periods of hunger. When potatoes were grown, they often appeared in botanical gardens where wealthy landowners admired their flowers, but ignored the tubers beneath the soil. There was another problem. Some Europeans did not understand which part of the plant was edible. Potato leaves, stems, sprouts, and green tubers can contain high levels of toxic compounds. People who ate the wrong part could become ill. reinforcing the belief that the entire plant was dangerous. The potato therefore became trapped by its own reputation. It was productive, nutritious, and unusually adaptable. But it looked wrong. It came from a conquered civilization Europeans considered inferior, and it challenged deeply rooted ideas about what civilized people were supposed to eat. Bread represented status, religion, and tradition. The potato represented dirt, poverty, and uncertainty. For nearly 2 centuries, that prejudice limited its spread. But Europe was entering an age of repeated warfare, population pressure, and food shortages. Kings needed to feed armies. Governments needed to prevent rebellion, and farmers needed crops that could survive when grain failed. Under those conditions, the potato's weaknesses began to look less important. Its strengths became impossible to ignore. One of the potato's most influential supporters was Frederick the Great. King of Prussia, Frederick ruled a state that was repeatedly drawn into war. And war was disastrous for agriculture. Enemy soldiers could burn fields of wheat, destroy grain stores, or seize flour before it reached the population. A grain field was visible from a great distance. A potato field was not. The valuable part of the plant remained hidden underground. Soldiers could march across it without realizing that thousands of calories were buried beneath their boots. Potatoes also produced more food on small plots of land than many traditional European crops. For a ruler concerned with soldiers, population, and national survival, the advantages were obvious. In the mid-18th century, Frederick issued orders encouraging, and sometimes pressuring, farmers to grow potatoes. Many peasants resisted. They did not trust the crop, they did not know how to prepare it, and they did not appreciate being told what to plant by royal officials. Frederick's campaign later inspired one of the most famous legends in food history. According to the story, the king planted potatoes in a royal field and placed soldiers around it during the day. The guards made the crop appear rare and valuable at night. However, security became strangely relaxed. Local farmers crept into the field and stole the supposedly precious plants, taking them home to grow for themselves. The theft, the legend suggests, was exactly what Frederick wanted. Whether every detail of the story is true is uncertain. But the story survives because it captures an important reality: ordering people to accept an unfamiliar food often fails. Making them curious about it can work much better. Across the border in France, another man launched an even more determined campaign. His name was Antoine-Augustin Parmentier. Parmentier was a French pharmacist who served with the army during the 7 Years' War. He was captured by Prussian forces and spent time as a prisoner. During his captivity, potatoes were a major part of his diet. This experience changed him. French authorities and intellectuals still viewed potatoes with suspicion, but Parmentier had lived on them. He knew they could sustain human life. When he returned to France, he began promoting the crop with extraordinary energy. He wrote about its nutritional value. He conducted experiments. He argued that potatoes could reduce famine and make better use of poor farmland. But scientific arguments alone were not enough. So Parmentier turned the potato into a social event. He organized elaborate dinners where potatoes appeared in course after course. Important guests were invited to taste potato soups, potato breads, potato dishes, and even potato-based desserts. He understood something that modern advertisers know very well. People do not always change their behavior because of facts. They change because of status, curiosity, fashion, and social approval. Parmentier reportedly presented potato flowers to King Louis XVI. Marie Antoinette was said to have worn the blossoms in her hair. Suddenly, the plant associated with poverty appeared in royal society. Parmentier was also credited with using a guarded potato field, much like the one in the Frederick legend. Soldiers protected the field during the day, making the crop seem valuable. At night, the guards withdrew, allowing people to steal the plants. Once again, the forbidden crop became desirable. Parmentier did not single-handedly make France eat potatoes. Economic pressure, food shortages, changing agricultural practices, and government policy all played important roles. But he became the potato's most famous public advocate. His name still survives in French cuisine. Hachis parmentier, a dish made with minced meat and mashed potatoes, remains a reminder of the man who spent much of his life trying to rescue the potato from its terrible reputation. By the end of the 18th century, Europe was finally changing its mind. The potato was no longer just a strange foreign plant, it was becoming a solution. But in Ireland, that solution would grow into a dangerous dependency. And when the crop failed, the result would transform the Atlantic world. In 18th and 19th century Ireland, the potato found nearly perfect growing conditions. The climate was cool and wet, the crop could grow in soil where wheat often struggled. And most importantly, potatoes could produce a remarkable amount of food from a very small piece of land. That mattered because Irish society was deeply unequal. Ireland was governed as part of the United Kingdom, while much of its land was controlled by Protestant landlords, many of whom lived in Britain or belonged to the Anglo-Irish elite. Large numbers of Catholic Irish families survived as tenant farmers. They worked land they did not own and could be removed if they failed to pay rent. As farms were divided among children, many families were left with plots too small to support them through grain farming. The potato made survival possible. A small field could produce enough calories to sustain a large family. The crop could be planted with relatively simple tools, harvested from poor ground, and combined with milk or buttermilk to create a diet that, while extremely limited, provided a surprising range of nutrients. For many rural laborers, potatoes were not a side dish. They were almost the entire diet. Adults could consume several pounds of potatoes in a single day. This intense dependence helped support rapid population growth. Ireland's population rose from roughly 3 million at the beginning of the 18th century to more than 8 million by the early 1840s. On the surface, the potato appeared to be a miracle, but beneath that success was an enormous vulnerability. Irish farmers relied heavily on a narrow range of potato varieties, especially a high-yielding variety known as the lumper. The lumper was not famous for its taste or quality. Its advantage was that it produced large harvests in poor conditions. But when farmers plant genetically similar crops across an enormous area, disease can spread with terrifying efficiency. Diversity creates barriers. Uniformity removes them. In the mid-1840s, the organism responsible for potato late blight reached Europe, probably from the Americas, although its exact route remains debated. It was called Phytophthora infestans. It was not technically a true fungus, but a fungus, like water mold, that flourished in cool, wet weather. Ireland provided almost ideal conditions. In the summer of 1845, dark patches appeared on potato leaves. Plants that had looked healthy days earlier began to collapse. When farmers dug into the soil, they found potatoes turning brown and soft. The crop was rotting from the inside. Some potatoes looked healthy when they were harvested, only to decay later in storage. The smell spread through fields, cottages, and villages. The first failure was severe, but many people hoped the next harvest would recover. Instead, the disease returned in 1846 and destroyed much of the crop. That second failure pushed the country into catastrophe. Families sold furniture, tools, clothing, and livestock to buy food. When their possessions were gone, many could no longer pay rent. Evictions increased. Homes were destroyed to prevent tenants from returning. Thousands of desperate people entered overcrowded workhouses, institutions that were already poorly equipped to handle mass hunger. Starvation weakened the population, but hunger was not the only killer. Typhus, relapsing fever, dysentery, and other diseases spread rapidly among malnourished families and crowded communities. People died inside cottages. They died beside roads. They died while walking toward workhouses, ports, or towns where they hoped to find food. And yet, Ireland was not completely without food. Grain, livestock, and other agricultural products continued to leave the country during parts of the famine. This fact has shaped historical debate ever since. The potato blight caused the crop failure, but political decisions, land ownership, poverty, government policy, and the structure of the colonial economy helped determine who suffered and who survived. Early relief efforts provided some assistance, but the response was inconsistent and deeply influenced by political ideology. Many British officials believed that excessive government aid would interfere with markets or create dependency. Relief programs were reduced, reorganized, or delayed even as conditions worsened. For starving families, these theories had deadly consequences. Between 1845 and the early 1850s, approximately 1 million people died from starvation and related disease. Another million or more left the country. Many crossed the Atlantic aboard overcrowded vessels that became known as coffin ships. Passengers endured hunger, contaminated water, fever, and appalling sanitation. Some died before reaching land. Others arrived in Canada or the United States sick, penniless, and traumatized. But the people who survived did not simply disappear into foreign cities. They changed them. Irish immigrants built neighborhoods, churches, unions, newspapers, businesses, and political organizations. In cities such as Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, Irish communities became a major force in urban life. They supplied workers for canals, railways, factories, mines, ports, and construction projects. Over time, their descendants entered politics, law enforcement, education, business, and national government. The famine also left a permanent wound inside Ireland. The island's population collapsed and continued to decline for decades. Families were separated across oceans. The Irish language weakened in many regions. Anger toward British rule deepened. The political consequences would echo through later movements for land reform, independence, and Irish nationalism. A disease had attacked a crop, but the disaster that followed transformed nations. And the lesson was not simply that potatoes were dangerous. The deeper lesson was that no society should place the survival of millions of people in a single crop, a single variety, or a single fragile system. The Great Famine did not end the global rise of the potato. In a strange way, it demonstrated just how important the crop had become. The failure was catastrophic precisely because the potato had been so productive, so useful, and so deeply connected to human survival. Agricultural researchers began paying greater attention to disease resistance and crop diversity. Breeders crossed varieties, searched for more resilient plants, and developed systems for producing healthier seed potatoes. The goal was not to abandon the crop, it was to make dependence on it less dangerous. Across Europe, potato cultivation continued to expand. In Russia, government attempts to promote potatoes had once triggered confusion and resistance. Over time, however, farmers discovered that the crop offered a valuable reserve when grain harvests failed. The potato became so important in parts of Eastern Europe that it earned the nickname the second bread. It also became deeply connected to regional cooking, from soups and dumplings to pancakes, salads, and distilled spirits. In Asia, the potato filled agricultural gaps that rice and wheat could not always reach. In the mountainous regions of China, farmers found that potatoes could grow at high elevations and in relatively poor soil. The crop became especially valuable in cooler areas where rice cultivation was difficult. China eventually emerged as the world's largest potato producer, while India also became one of the crop's leading producers. The potato entered local cuisines so completely that it began to feel native. In India, potatoes became essential to dishes such as aloo gobi, samosas, curries, and spiced snacks. Yet the plant had traveled thousands of miles from its original home in the Andes. The same pattern appeared across many parts of the world. A foreign crop arrived, adapted to local conditions, entered traditional cooking, and eventually became so familiar that its foreign origin was almost forgotten. In parts of Africa, potatoes became an important crop for highland farmers, particularly in regions with cooler climates. Because potatoes mature relatively quickly and produce substantial food from limited land, they can offer income as well as nutrition. But the historical warning remains: potatoes are productive, not invincible. Farmers still face late blight, pests, changing weather, poor seed quality, and unstable markets. Modern agriculture continues to depend on genetic diversity, careful disease monitoring, and access to healthy planting material. The potato's history therefore contains two messages at once. It is a story about extraordinary agricultural potential, and it is a warning about what happens when efficiency replaces resilience. Today, the potato is one of the most important food crops on Earth. Only a handful of crops, including maize, rice, and wheat, rival its global importance. But most modern consumers do not encounter potatoes as emergency food or imperial supply. They encounter them as fries, chips, mashed potatoes, baked potatoes, hash browns, and countless regional dishes. The exact origin of the French fry remains disputed, with both Belgium and France connected to its early history. What is not disputed is what happened next. The fried potato became a global obsession. Fast food restaurants turned fries into one of the most recognizable products on the planet. Potato chips became a massive international industry. Frozen processing allowed potatoes to travel farther, last longer, and taste more consistent across different markets. A crop once rejected as animal feed became a symbol of modern convenience. But the potato's influence goes far beyond food. Potato starch is used in paper, textiles, adhesives, pharmaceuticals, coatings, and some biodegradable materials. It can thicken sauces, bind manufactured products, and serve as a raw material in industrial processing. Potatoes have also been used to produce alcoholic spirits, including certain varieties of vodka. The crop that once supported Andean communities and European peasants now appears inside supply chains that most consumers never see. Then, in the 1990s, the potato entered a completely new environment space. In 1995, potato plants were cultivated aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia as part of research connected to growing food beyond Earth. The experiment was small, but its symbolism was enormous. The crop that began on the freezing slopes of the Andes had left the planet. Potatoes continue to interest researchers studying future food production in extreme environments. They produce substantial calories in relatively little space. They can grow in containers and controlled systems. Their edible portion is compact and versatile. That does not mean astronauts will simply plant ordinary potatoes directly in Martian soil. Growing food on the Moon or Mars would require controlled habitats, safe water, nutrients, stable temperatures, radiation protection, and carefully engineered agricultural systems. But potatoes remain a serious candidate for experiments in closed environment food production, and there is something strangely appropriate about that. The same qualities that allowed the potato to survive freezing nights, thin air, and rocky soil in the Andes may help humanity explore environments far beyond its original home. The potato began as a small, bitter, and sometimes poisonous plant growing high in the Andes. Indigenous farmers spent thousands of years transforming it. They selected safer varieties, developed preservation techniques, and built agricultural systems capable of supporting communities in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. The Inca used it to feed cities, store food, and supply an empire. The Spanish carried it across the Atlantic, but failed to understand its importance. Europe feared it, mocked it, and associated it with disease and poverty. Then war, hunger, science, politics, and some extremely creative publicity campaigns forced people to reconsider. The potato helped populations grow. It protected families when grain harvests failed. It also became the center of a devastating dependency in Ireland, where crop disease combined with poverty, inequality, and political failure to kill and displace millions. The famine exposed the danger of agricultural uniformity. But the potato survived. It spread through Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. It entered factories, restaurants, laboratories, and eventually spacecraft. Today, it is grown on every inhabited continent. Few people look at an ordinary potato and see a revolutionary object. It has no dramatic shape, no brilliant color, no expensive reputation. It's simply there, covered in dirt, waiting beneath the ground. But hidden inside that ordinary appearance is the history of human ingenuity, prejudice, survival, tragedy, migration, science, and exploration. Not bad for a food that Europe once refused to eat, and perhaps, one day, the first meal harvested by human beings on another world will include the same crop our ancestors learned to cultivate 8,000 years ago, high above the clouds. The potato did not merely travel around the world, it helped create the world we live in today.